Hey guys, this is Noxulence, and recently I watched a video from fellow YouTuber Young Rippa59 where he discusses the newest iteration of Static. In that video, Rippa revealed that DC retconned Static's origin story to mirror the BLM protests and riots that occurred during the summer of 2020. It honestly annoyed me hearing that DC needlessly dated Static's origin story because they wanted it to reflect current day issues. At first, I was planning on making a video on it to address its flaws, but then a new idea came to my head. Static actually has two other major iterations of his origin story, one being from his first comic run and the other being from his cartoon Static Shock. So for today, I thought it would be fun to compare his newest origin story to those other versions of his origin story. So the way that this is gonna work is that I'm gonna go over each origin story individually and go over what they do that's both good and bad. Afterwards, I'll compare each origin story to one another and reveal which is the best between the three of them. Now with that out of the way, let's start this off by going over Static's origin from his first comic run, which began in Static number 2. In the first issue, Static went up against a supervillain known as Hotstreak and was just about to beat him. Right as Static's about to finish the fight, he got a good look of Hotstreak's face and realized that he was his bully, Martin Scapone. This caused him to lose all his nerve, which gave Hotstreak the chance to pummel him to the ground. After Hotstreak walks away, Static's crush, Frida, tries to console him before finding out that her friend Virgil is Static. Issue 2 takes place not too long after the events of Issue 1. The issue starts off with Static taking Frida back to her house where she helps tend to his injuries. Curious as to how her friend became a superhero, Frida asks Virgil how he became Static, leading him to reluctantly recount his story. He reveals he had gotten his powers the day that he and Frida had met, after Martin tried and failed to get her number. Upset that Virgil had made fun of him and got in his way of talking with Frida, Martin starts beating on him. Before Martin could do anything else to him, Virgil's friend Larry steps in and scares Martin off. On their way home from school, Larry advises Virgil to stand up against Martin because if he doesn't, he'll have a bad rep for the rest of high school. He advises Virgil to put an end to Martin's life and even tells him that if he needs a gun, he'll give him one. After being taunted by his sister, being given a hard time by his mom for being bullied, and being called a wimp by Frida, Virgil decides that enough is enough and goes to see Larry. Keeping his promise, Larry gives Virgil a gun and tells him where Martin usually hangs out. Once Virgil finds Martin, he aims his gun at him, ready to permanently put an end to Martin's bullying. However, before he pulls the trigger, Virgil puts the gun down once he realizes what the consequences of his actions would lead to. After Virgil gets rid of the gun, the police show up to arrest Martin and his gang, using a newly developed form of tear gas to apprehend them. Unfortunately, the gas causes most of the people present to die. Though luckily for Virgil, he wasn't one of those people. Attempting to escape the area of the gas, Virgil is stopped by the authorities. Thankfully, the gas had caused him to develop electrokinetic powers, allowing Virgil to escape capture. Afterwards, Virgil started working out and training his powers, which led him to become Static. After he finishes telling Frida his story, Virgil regained his resolve and confronts Hotstreak again. Only this time, he beats him and embarrasses him in front of his friends. And that, my friends, pretty much wraps up Static's original origin story. Overall, I thought it was very well written and his progression felt mostly natural. That being said, I believe everything happened a little too fast. It makes sense that after he gets beat up and humiliated and his mom, sister, and Frida give him a hard time about it, that he'd reach his breaking point. However, the problem in all of that is that he reached his breaking point way too fast. I understand that Virgil is a kid and that kids do things on an impulse sometimes, but even so, it still happens way too fast. He only met and got bullied by Martin one time, and on the same day they met, just because he bullied him one time, he wants to shoot him? Even with Larry encouraging Virgil to do it so he doesn't get a bad rep, it still feels like Virgil is really jumping the gun. If they showed more moments of Martin bullying Virgil, it would make more sense why Virgil almost shoots Martin. But since they don't, it makes this origin story feel somewhat rushed. Also, they don't really show Virgil's reasoning for wanting to become a superhero. It's one thing for him to work out and train his powers so that he's not defenseless anymore, but it's another thing for him to want to become a superhero. Admittedly though, it's not really that big of a deal. Anyone who's read Static number 1 can easily point out that Virgil is shown to like superheroes, so it makes sense that he'd want to become one himself. I would have appreciated it if Virgil verbalized that, but again, it's not a big deal, just a nitpick on my end. Another positive that I'd like to bring up is how well Virgil's character was established. Virgil's a dorky and confident guy that likes cracking jokes. It's not until Martin starts beating on him that his confidence fades because he's put in a position where he has no power at all. That's why in issue 1, when he faces off against Hotstreak and realizes that he's Martin, Virgil ends up losing even though he was winning at first, because it reminded him of how helpless he felt and how humiliated he was. He didn't even think he stood a chance even though he had the power to fight back now. However, once Virgil is able to cool off after telling Frieda his origin, he wants to try to fight Hotstreak again because he knows he has the power to do it. He's not helpless anymore. He's Static now. He has the power to stand up for himself. And as it turns out, he was right to feel that way. The fact that the writers were able to establish Virgil and his motivations so well in a 30-page comic is truly remarkable and deserves to be praised. All in all, Static's original origin story was a great introduction to Static, though it could have been improved if the writers had shown Virgil being bullied more than one time to make Virgil's actions feel less drastic. Next, I'll be going over Static's origin story from the first episode of Static Shock, Shock to the System. After stopping his first ever robbery, Static reminisces about how he became a superhero in the first place. 2 days prior, Virgil was working up the courage to ask Frieda to an upcoming school dance when Francis, Martin's animated counterpart, interrupts them so that he can talk with Frieda. Virgil tries to get Francis to back off, but only succeeds in angering him and turning his attention to Virgil. Before Francis could throw a punch, Wade, Larry's animated counterpart, steps in, causing Francis to walk away. However, Francis confronts and corners Virgil on his way home from school before pounding on him. He stops and leaves only when one of his friends tell him that Wade is coming, leaving Virgil behind with an unimpressed Wade. Wade tells Virgil to meet him in half an hour under a stone bridge, speaking in a tone that suggested that he wouldn't take no for an answer. Once Virgil meets up with Wade again, Wade tells him that even though he likes him, having to protect Virgil from Francis is a waste of his time. He then adds that he's not always going to be around to help Virgil when Francis is giving him a hard time before telling Virgil that he should join his gang. Wade's invitation stems from the belief that if Virgil joins his gang, Francis will know better than to mess with Virgil again. Virgil is reluctant to join, so he doesn't give Wade an actual answer. Unfortunately, Wade takes Virgil's lack of response as a yes, leading Virgil to later find out from his best friend Richie that Wade went around telling people that Virgil is in his gang. Richie chastises Virgil for getting himself into that situation, reminding Virgil that gang violence is what had gotten Virgil's mom killed. Before Virgil can figure something out, Wade gives Virgil a call and tells him to meet him and his gang at the docks to take care of Francis. Not allowing Virgil a chance to say anything, Wade hangs up, leaving Virgil clueless on how to fix things. After arriving at the docks, Wade tells Virgil that the reason they were there was to fight Francis and his crew. He then hands Virgil a gun so that he could deal with his problem with Francis permanently. Not wanting anything to do with the situation he was forced into, Virgil throws the gun into the water and tries to escape. Before he could leave, the cops arrive and try to break up the fight using tear gas. Unfortunately, the tear gas ends up hitting a hazardous canister of gas, causing everyone nearby to be severely affected. In spite of this, Virgil is able to escape and wakes up the next morning safe and sound. Throughout the morning, Virgil notices weird things going on around him, like his blankets clinging to his body and appliances turning on without being plugged in. He deduces that the gas gave him superpowers before calling Richie to tell him to meet him at the town's local junkyard. Once they meet up, Virgil showcases his new abilities to Richie, amazing his friend while also having fun with his powers at the same time. Richie suggests that Virgil should become a superhero now that he has powers, to which Virgil excitedly agrees. After remembering picking out his costume, Virgil stops reminiscing and notices that one of the things that the robbers were trying to steal were computers from his school. Taking the computers with him, Static delivers them to the school while everyone is setting up for the school dance. Wanting to impress Frieda, Static finishes setting up the dance by himself and flirts with her before flying off. The episode ends showing how the gas affected everyone else at the pier and teases Francis' transformation into Hotstreak. Looking at this episode as a critic and not a fan, Static Shock's interpretation of Static's origin story is just average.
Fool this man!
Yeah, that's a fair reaction. Look, I like this episode, and I'm a huge fan of the show, so trust me when I say that even I don't like that I said that. However, it needed to be said, and I'll explain to you why. So before I go over what I thought they did wrong, I want to talk about what they did right with this version of his origin story. This episode did a good job of establishing Virgil's character. Just like in the Milestone comics, Virgil's a dorky guy who likes cracking jokes. That being said, unlike in the Milestone comics, he's more timid, as shown when he tries to work up the nerve to ask Frieda out, or when he lets himself get dragged around by Wade instead of firmly telling him no. However, whenever he's Static, He's more willing to push past his comfort zone, and he even acknowledges that in the episode.
Not as beautiful as the sight I see, ma chérie. Why isn't it this easy for Virgil?
It goes to show how having powers and hiding behind a persona brings out Virgil's confidence. Sure, it's simple writing, but not everything has to be deep or thought-provoking. Even the simple things should be appreciated. On top of that, they also did a good job setting up Francis as a future villain for Static. Him and Virgil already had a history before they got powers, so setting up a future clash between them is a good way to show Virgil finally standing up for himself. Additionally, actually, I think that's pretty much it. Everything else about this origin story is inoffensive, with one problem holding it back from being great. The underlying issue with this iteration of Static's origin story is the fact that they made Virgil have no agency, which in turn makes the story feel contrived. After getting beat up, Virgil went to visit Wade even though he was supposed to meet up with his father. Even though he didn't outright say no to Wade when he asked Virgil to join his gang, he could have told him no after Wade had called him to meet up with him at the docks. All this to say, Virgil never would have gotten his powers if it weren't for him going along with what Wade said. Virgil didn't want to be in Wade's gang and he didn't have to. All he had to do was say no to Wade. And it's not like Wade is someone who Virgil should have a reason to be scared of. They're friends. Even though Wade didn't want to have to fight off Virgil's bully anymore, he did want to help Virgil with his Francis problem, albeit in an extreme way. He obviously cares about Virgil, so Virgil shouldn't have a problem telling his friend that he doesn't want to join his gang. They should have made it more similar to his Milestone origin and written it so he's confident in himself, but have it go away once he gets bullied by Francis and he feels humiliated by everyone at school bringing it up. After that, have it so Virgil agrees to join Wade's gang because he doesn't want to be bullied by Francis anymore, and that he takes the gun from Wade willingly before throwing it away after remembering his mom. Considering Virgil knows who Francis is and that he bullied Virgil twice that episode, viewers can infer that Francis had been bullying Virgil for a while, which would have made Virgil's actions be more understandable. Then, when Virgil gets his powers, have him work out and train them like he did in the Milestone Comics version, only this time, Richie could try and help him. If they would have done that, Virgil's origin in Static Shock would have been way better than his Milestone origin story. It would have taken what made that story so great and ironed out the few issues it had. At the bare minimum, they could have at least given him some agency by having Virgil point out that he could be a hero instead of Richie doing it for him. Overall, while this interpretation of Static's origin story wasn't bad, it could have been way better. It's basically a copy of Static's origin from Milestone Comics with some changes that did nothing to enhance the story. Finally, let's go over Static's newest comic origin story in Milestone Returns number 0. In 2020, DC Comics rebooted Static's comic book universe, which was known as the Dakotaverse. Characters from the Dakotaverse had their origin stories rewritten and introduced in Milestone Returns number 0, including Static's. During a Black Lives Matter protest, Virgil is confronted by one of his many bullies. Wanting to be strong and tough like his father, Virgil decides to stand up for himself for the first time. While Virgil tries to defend himself, the protesters take notice, causing a fight to break out and a riot to occur. The police are called in order to break up the riot and end up using a newly developed form of tear gas to disperse the crowd. Unfortunately, the gas has some unexpected side effects as the protesters begin to develop superhuman abilities, including Virgil. After recovering in bed due to the tear gas having a heavy effect on his body, Virgil finds out that he has electrokinetic powers. In order to get a better control of them, Virgil trained his powers, using anger as a motivator. Once he gets a good handle on his powers, Virgil decides to stand up to his biggest bully, Francis Stone, once he sees that Francis was harassing someone. While he's fighting Francis, his powers start to make him more aggressive, though at the last second, he's able to get a grip and stop. Deciding that he wants to stand up to the bullies for himself and his peers, Virgil becomes a superhero by the name of Static. And that is where Static's origin story in Milestone Returns comes to an end. Honestly, this was better than I was expecting it to be. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not saying it was good, I'm just saying it wasn't horrible. Starting off, the story pulls readers out of the world it's trying to introduce them to by referencing the BLM protests and riots that took place during the summer of 2020. Not only does that date the story, but it also sours the experience for people who want to read comics to have a distraction from the real world. Some of the dialogue can also pull readers out of the story because of how bad it can be. For example, when one of the police officers notices that a kid's face is melting off, he compares it to the end of Indiana Jones. I wish I was kidding about that. Another example would be when a girl tells Virgil that he doesn't seem like a protest march type, whatever the heck that means. One of the best examples, and you're gonna have to bear with me for this one because it is really bad, is when Francis calls Virgil an Oreo and claims that he wants to claim his blackness to get with Frida. That example, however, is nothing compared to this final example. So Frida ends up responding to what Francis says, and that response makes no sense at all. It baffles me to the point where I think that whoever edited this comic only gave this story a quick once-over and then called it a day. So Frida calls Francis a jerk and then rhetorically asks him if that he knew that calling Being Smart white is racist. It just honestly boggles my mind because where did that even come from? Francis didn't mention anything about how being smart means you're white. At best, Francis said that Virgil was a sellout, but that's basically it. He didn't imply anything else. I actually stopped reading and went back pages in the book to see if at any point Francis mentioned how being smart means being white, and I didn't find anything. Nothing at all. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I wholeheartedly believe that the writer just forgot to add dialogue for Francis, because otherwise, Frida just ends up sounding stupid. Additionally, it is very obvious that whoever was writing this comic doesn't like the police. At the beginning of the story, Virgil claims that the police were shooting at peaceful protesters, but the comic itself contradicts that statement badly. So badly, in fact, that it cemented my suspicions of the editor not doing their job properly. 1. While the police were shooting at the protesters, they were shooting tear gas at them, not bullets. And 2. It was not a peaceful protest. At the beginning it started out peaceful, but when Virgil had gotten into that fight, everyone else started fighting, causing a riot leading to the cops being called. I'm honestly shocked that whoever wrote this tried to frame it like the police were the ones in the wrong when it was clearly the protesters. Admittedly, there was a part where a policeman was evil, but it was written so cartoonishly bad that I really can't take it seriously. The only thing that really saves this story from not being utter garbage is the character work they did for Virgil. Just like in the original comic, Virgil is a dorky and confident guy who likes telling jokes. However, in this version of his origin story, his confidence is more artificial. Internally, Virgil knows that he's a weak person, which is why he always gets bullied. He may act confident and smooth on the outside, but on the inside, he wishes he can be strong like his dad. You see, Virgil's dad is the nice person who helps out those who are in need. Virgil believes that his dad can afford to be nice because he has the strength to defend himself if his kindness was ever used against him. And since Virgil is weak, he could never afford the chance to help others because he was always getting picked on by other people. His desire to be strong like his dad is leads him to finally try and stand up for himself. And once he gets his powers, he tries to act more like his father by using them to protect himself and others. After all, since he has the strength now, he can stand up to the bullies who torment himself and his classmates as Static. I honestly really appreciate this version of Static. Putting aside the story's problems, his development from a weakling who wants to be strong like his dad to a superhero who emulates his dad's values was handled pretty well. While yes, the story is dated, the negative portrayal of the police is heavy-handed, the editor did a horrible job, and the dialogue may make me want to roll my eyes at times, I can at least enjoy Virgil's character portrayal. Now that I've gone over all 3 of Static's origin stories, it's time that I finally rank them. I'm gonna be ranking them starting with the worst version of his origin story and ending it off with the best version of his origin story. Coming in last place is Static's origin story in Milestone Returns number 0. While I enjoyed the comic for its interpretation of Virgil's character, everything else about it was abysmal. I kept getting pulled away from the story, and it's because the writers added in real-life events that happened in recent times, wrote cringe-inducing dialogue, and made certain parts of the story make no sense. If a reader is consistently brought out of the story because of the writing, then the story isn't worth reading. In second place, we have Static's origin story and Static Shock's first episode, Shock to the System. While the episode shouldn't have made Virgil lack agency and go along with whatever Wade said, it's not a bad origin story for Static. It establishes Virgil's character, how he got his powers, and why he became Static in a decent manner. While the episode didn't do a bad job telling its story, it could have done a way better job, and that's why it's in second place. Finally, in first place, we have Static's origin story in Static number 2. While it did feel like Virgil jumped the gun with wanting to shoot Martin, everything else about his origin story was great. The characterization, the build up to how he got his powers, and the story's payoff were written incredibly well. I honestly can't praise this comic more than I already did earlier in this video. It's just so good. And that, my friends, is how I ranked each of these 3 origin stories of Static. I honestly had a lot more fun with this idea than I thought I would. I really enjoyed reading Static number 2 for the first time and analyzing it, and it was great getting a rewatch shock to the system despite noticing the episode's flaws for the first time. And as for Milestone Returns number 0, well, at least I got something out of it. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video and you want to show support, like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter and Odyssey. We are so close to hitting 10,000 subscribers, so any and all support is greatly appreciated. Have a good night, guys, and until next time, lights out.